Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me at the art table again today. I hope everyone had a very enjoyable Christmas. You got to sit down, eat a lot of good food, and spend time with family members. Now that we're back to the daily grind, it's possible you have a couple of Amazon gift cards burning a hole through your pocket, so I wanted to take another chance to tell you a little bit about my latest book, Have Spell Will Travel. I've already done a couple of videos going over the longer stories in the anthology, but there are also a quartet of short stories in the book. I enjoyed writing these just as much as the novellas, and in some cases more. So I thought I would give you a quick thumbnail of each of them, in case anything there caught your interest. Now, some of these short stories were written as submissions for various publications. Unfortunately, none of them were picked up, but I still have them available for your reading pleasure. That's one of the advantages of writing short stories. Even if you can't get them published in a magazine or something like that, you still have them available for your own anthologies. However, simply because these stories were written for different publications with different thematic requirements doesn't mean I wasn't also thinking about Roy and how each of these short stories would fit into his larger story. The strongest example of that is Blood and Wax, a short story told from the perspective of Brennan Harwick, detailing Brennan's first meeting with Roy Harper. Now, Brennan is a character I always knew was a part of Roy's story. He's the first Lakeshire druid that Roy meets and gets an understanding of in a personal capacity, not on the battlefield during the Lakeshire War. They meet about 2 years after the conclusion of that war, while Roy is part of an expedition into Tetzlan, the nation to Columbia's south. During this time period, a blood cult is active in Tetzlan, and they have been kidnapping and turning Columbian citizens into human sacrifices. The government in Hancock decides that an expedition must be launched in reprisal to wipe out the cult because the government of Tetzlan isn't doing anything about it. So a single army regiment is sent into the mountains to track down the cultists and deal with them. I didn't want this to be the start of Roy's story as I wrote it because it begins with him still in the army. Like many characters in the Old West, army service is a big part of Roy's history, but it's just that, a part of his history. The West is representative of new beginnings and new opportunities, so that kind of past is generally something the character is making a hard break from. It should not define the character as they are introduced. That is why I chose to write a number of short stories and novellas before I actually sat down and wrote Blood and Wax. I believe this was actually the 5th or 6th Roy Harper story I wrote, pretty much for the express purpose of making sure I had a clear grasp on the character as a Firespinner rather than as a soldier. That said, it was pretty fun to write, and it's pretty self-contained. You don't really need to know a whole lot about what happens before or after, which is good because I want most of the Tetzalani reprisal expedition to be sort of off-screen. It's not something I want to spend a whole lot of time talking about, but Brennan is an important character to understanding Roy, so I did want to do a little bit that shows the dynamic between the two. None of this is to say that we won't ever see Tetzlan or some of the after effects of the reprisal expedition. I just don't think it's a very good point of Roy's life to focus on. Still, if you like the idea of a couple of really hardy folk taking revenge on a group of really nasty cultists, Blood and Wax should scratch that itch for you. The Frozen Nest introduces the character of Captain Booker, or Books as Roy calls him. Captain Booker is the leader of the reprisal expedition, but like Roy, by the time you get to 10 years after the Lakeshire War, Booker has retired. He's not a member of the army anymore. He's a private businessman overseeing a shipping concern. When a ship goes missing and turns up on the wrong side of the Sana border, Roy and Books have to go and look at the ship, get it out of Sana water before there's an international incident, and maybe, possibly, find out what happened to the passengers and the crew. Much like Fire and Gold, The Frozen Nest is just a look at Roy in his day-to-day life, doing the kind of things that he pays the bills with, and make him a reputation as one of the most dangerous men in the West. A Eulogy for Morgan Hale is a similar story. It is about Roy's reputation, yes, but it's also about the reputation of other people in the West. There are a lot of nasty outlaws in the Columbian West. Part of Roy's job is to deal with them. Yet, every so often, he can't. Or he doesn't. When a man dies in a small town in the Columbian West, where there is very little news from the outside world, Roy Harper turns up with a bounty poster in hand, and a difficult question that the people there have to answer about the late Morgan Hale. Finally, A Tale for Wintertide is the only story in this collection where Roy Harper himself does not appear. I actually wrote it as something of a companion piece to Night Train to Hardwick. Both of these stories are about setting aside the past in order to make the future. It's certainly not the easiest task, but in some cases, it is the only way to get over the past. As the former assistant master to the Knights of the Stone Circle, located in Morainhenge, the scars of the past are something that Major General Sir Hezekiah Oldfathers knows a lot about. A Tale for Wintertide brings us the General's reflections on his own past as he and some friends settle down to celebrate Wintertide, the darkest day of the year. The perfect day to reflect on what has been lost and set your sights on what is to come. The Knights of Morainhenge were a group of people that I created pretty much for backstory purposes. The world of Columbia needed a big conflict, and Morainhenge was just a place for that conflict to revolve around. But in the process, I did spend a lot of time thinking about them, the people who led the Knights, what they valued, and how they would respond to the pressures of a changing culture. It felt like a bit of a shame to let all of that work go to waste and never actually write a story about them. There may be more in the future, but A Tale for Wintertide is my first attempt to do that faction a little more justice in the story. Of course, if I ever get around to finishing Hexwood, the protagonist of that story is a Lakeshire druid, so hopefully they will get a lot of time to shine in that. But that project is very much on the back burner right now, so General Oldfathers gets to go first. So there you have it, a brief summary of the 4 short stories in this collection. Hopefully there's enough that's tantalizing to you there that when taken together with the brief look at the novellas, you'll be interested in going and picking up a copy. There will be a link where you can do that down in the description below. Go ahead and check that out. While you're down there, there's a like button and a subscribe button. You can use those as you see fit, and I'll talk to you later.